The biggest late-night voice in the Northeast, Adrian Allen.
On BBC Radio Cleveland.
This is the Late Show phone-in on BBC Radio Cleveland. 01642 225511. Of course, the text number is 07786 200 995, and the email is adrian.allen@bbc.co.uk. Now, as I was saying a little earlier, it is a privilege to extend a very warm welcome to BBC Radio Cleveland to David Icke. David, welcome.
Thank you, Adrian.
You're live on the Late Show phone-in.
Thank you.
Now, thank you for taking a bit of time to talk to us tonight. I've got so much I want to ask you, and so much I want to talk to you about. But I think, if you don't mind me saying this, I think the natural place to start is a lot of people will have seen the Wogan Then and Now and Now and Then, whatever it was last week. And I don't want to particularly touch on that, but I'd rather touch on the original Wogan interview that you gave. And with the greatest respect, David, a lot of people, when Wogan said they're laughing at you, not with you.
Just let me say this.
They're laughing at you. They're not laughing with you.
Fine.
It seemed as if you were kind of a rabbit caught in the headlights. What was it like being in that bubble around about then?
Well, I was in many ways. What happened to me, Adrian, and apart from in my books, the story's very rarely been told, is that I was obviously working for the BBC, introducing the snooker and sport and stuff, and I was also national spokesman for the British Green Party, and some very strange things suddenly started happening to me. For instance, throughout 1989, if I was in a room alone, it was as if there was someone or something there, this presence, I couldn't explain it. And this got to such an extent towards the end of 1989 that it was so tangible that there was something there. I remember sitting on the edge of a bed in a hotel in London when I was working for the BBC, and I said out loud, if there's something there, would you please contact me or do something, because you're driving me up the wall. And what happened then is a series of coincidences happened, which led me to certain psychics and stuff who started telling me that I was going to go out on a world stage and reveal great secrets about who was really controlling the world as opposed to who people thought was. And that I was going to write many, many books on these subjects. But I thought that was ludicrous at the time because I knew nothing about these subjects, and the number of books they said I was going to write, I thought you're off the wall, mate. You're having a laugh. But it happened, and around early 1991, I had some amazing experiences in Peru, where basically the top of my head blew off, and all I can describe it is like sitting in a box all your life, and everyone else in the box was telling you the box was all that existed, and everything around you was all there was to see and know. And then someone just coming and lifting the lid off the box and saying, "Have a look at that, son." And it was, my mind suddenly exploded with knowledge, concepts, information, and it was so vast and so sudden. I can only describe it, Adrian, as like when you press too many keys on the computer freezes up and goes, "Sorry, can't process this, I'm out of here." And so for a period of about 3 months, with the Wogan show right in the middle, if you'd have asked me what planet I was on, I would have checked. But all this time, there were these concepts, these understandings, this information was pouring into my mind. And then after about 3 months, and all the enormous ridicule that followed, it was like the computer unfroze, and people would come up to me and say, "Hey, Dave, I thought you'd gone mad. You're the same person I always knew." And on one level, that was true. But on another level, it wasn't, because what I was left with was strangely this ability to see through smoke screens. When people were saying things with words, I could hear what they were really saying, in fact, and what they were using the words to hide and divert from. And what happened was, as these psychics had said, suddenly, from late 91, 92 onwards, I started living a life of the most extraordinary coincidence, where I would come across people, information, documents, books, personal experiences that were, all I can describe it, Adrian, is like something was handing me the pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, not only in abundance, but in the order I needed to understand where they fitted. And what has unfolded since then is something like 16 books, and especially about the last 6 or 7, that have exposed an extraordinary story of global manipulation, in which the forces truly running the world and orchestrating the invasions of Iraq and whatever, or 9/11 and all this stuff, who they really are. And
I've got to ask you a fairly simple question, David.
Yeah.
Why you?
Well, a lot of people have asked me that, and I've asked myself that, and there's a couple of answers to that. Why are you a radio presenter? Why is anyone anything? It's just the way that life unfolds. And the other thing is, as I pointed out to a massively ill-informed Terry Wogan in the second interview the other day.
Let me tell you this. Tell me about the project for the New American Century. Tell me about it.
I know nothing about it.
Exactly. Well, let me tell you then.
It's not only me that is putting this stuff out. There are thousands of researchers all over the world who are doing the same research, coming to the same conclusions, basic conclusions from the same information. And unfortunately, we seem genetically, we are genetically in a situation where we find it almost impossible to say the word conspiracy without saying theory afterwards. I mean, does the word conspiracy alone not exist? It doesn't seem to. In fact, vast tracts of this stuff are not theory at all. They're documentable fact. And the difference between all these other people, Adrian, and me is because of my infamy, if you like, and notoriety. I'm able to get some of this stuff, and it is only some, into the public domain, where these other researchers never get near a camera or a microphone.
But is it the point now, David, where and you quite rightly say, the word conspiracy now, today, cannot be constructed into a sentence without the word theory stuck after
absolutely.
it? But do you not think that the conspiracy theory now is becoming a pastiche? It's becoming a caricature of itself? Well, everything is a conspiracy.
What it's becoming, Adrian, is ever more credible, because when I started out on this, it was to an extent a projection forward. It was happening, but it was still a projection forward in terms of the real cutting edge and extreme of the Orwellian state that was planned. Since 9/11, and with every passing day, almost with every passing hour, on my website, davidicke.com, every day I track these changes, and the speed in which they're happening is getting faster and faster. We've reached the point now where it's no longer a projection forward. It's not, if we don't change, we're going to live in an Orwellian global fascist state. No, we're already in it. The question is, how far are we going to go in it? How much more are we going to allow it to control our lives? And one of the massive things that has happened in terms of interest in my work is when people read some of my earlier books, like And the Truth Shall Set You Free, which I wrote in 93, came out in 94. There's a 20th first century edition came out a few years ago. And when they read that against what is happening in the world now in front of their eyes, they are shocked at the correlation between the two. In fact, I'm just talking at the moment to a television production company who are planning to produce a program for Channel 5 called David Icke, the Man Who Got It Right, ? And how that came about was in the mid-90s, and when I was watched by a man and a dog, when the dog bothered to turn up, when they used to come to my talks. I was doing public talks while thinking about writing to a Lonely Hearts Agency. So you people were in the audience.
Yeah.
Well, I spoke in Belfast in the kind of 94 time. I didn't know that at the time, obviously, but a student was in the audience who is now a television producer, and what he did was he remembered what I said, and then he looked at the world as it is now. And then he, as a result of that, he went, "Well, there's a connection here." And he started reading my books over the last 3 months, and he's been staggered by what's in them compared with what's happening now. And he wants to do a program based on that. And all around the world, there are researchers who have come up with the same information, and some going back further than me, who are now being looked at in a completely different light, purely on the way the world has changed in the image that they predicted.
Surely today the world is different from one perspective. The fact that sort of 1991 and the advent of the net, the internet, we couldn't have this information at our disposal. And the fact that the internet over the last 15, 16 years has completely changed the way we are, let alone be. We have websites that you can go to for absolutely everything and anything. You have the fact that we're now doing away with almost CDs and DVDs. Everything is a hard drive and everything is downloadable from the internet. Our whole life has changed. Now, you, along with the internet, or the advent of the internet, do you think that there is some correlation between your, let's just call it change of career from, and forgive me for saying this, most people will describe you, and I know that you're described in the press as this conspiracy theory guru. The net arrives, David Icke has this epiphany, appears on our TV screens, and then all of a sudden, the two are running in tandem.
Well, first of all, for many, many years through the 1990s, I wasn't involved in the internet at all. I was putting this out purely through books and public talks. Public is a plural word, which is not always, like I said earlier, the case in terms of people that came to watch me. Now thousands do, but that's the difference, the change that has happened. But in terms of the internet, it's an interesting point. It's a two-edged sword for those that wish to control and manipulate us. On one hand, the internet is a fantastic tool for surveillance. I mean, reading emails and creating profiles of people through the websites they go to is a piece of cake. The downside was the free flow of information. And what's coming up now, and being involved in this, I see it from close range, is that more and more the pressure is being developed to suppress that which is a downside, i.e. the free flow of information, while keeping the upside for them, which is the ability to control and keep an eye on people. And there's no doubt that unless the public resist it, there is going to be a lot of pressure in the not-too-distant future for the internet to cease to be a vehicle for people like me. And what's going to be used as the excuse? The war on terrorism, protecting children from things that are in the internet. Do you know, people write to me all the time, Adrian, and here I am. I'm apparently some nutter, and I'm, no danger to anyone but myself. But they go into airports and places around the world, and they try to go into davidicke.com, and it comes up, not allowed. Why?
Well, if you look at what happened last week with China and Google are now censoring some of the sites that the Chinese can access because of the communist government turning around and saying, no, we don't want our people to access this.
Now, that's an excellent point. And what I'm saying to you is what is happening in China now is designed to happen on the wider internet too. And, if anyone wants to buy a soul, see Google for details, because if we are going to have a situation where companies like that are going to concede freedom of expression to governments like the Chinese simply because it's a massive market, then we can start to understand the real motivation of the corporate world, rather than the alleged self-serving motivation, which is we really want the freedom of the internet. Well, truth speaks, rather actions speak louder than words, and I think they've spoken very, very loudly, Google, in their action over China.
This is not meant as a curveball, David. There is a reason, and it's kind of a two-part question. One, whatever happened to the colour purple? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that. The second part is, in that original Wogan interview, now forgive me because I can't get a hold of the interview,
right.
So I probably won't get this quote right. But paraphrasing, you said that mankind had abused the earth for so long, the earth wasn't happy, and that the earth was going to have its say. And as a little addendum to that, I think most people were looking at you thinking, mad. Now, the two-part question is this: what happened to the colour purple? And that original statement, what were you trying to get across?
Well, two things to that. I tell you what's really fascinating for me over the years is how people have said to me, what was it with the colour purple? It was actually the colour turquoise.
Really?
Yes. But again and again, I've seen the word purple and been asked about purple when it was turquoise. The background to that is quite simple. When I had this amazing experience,
epiphany, yeah.
When it's like my mind opened and God, the infinity poured in. I became very attracted, for whatever reason, to the color turquoise, which is, of course, a sacred stone to the Native Americans. And funnily enough, when I first met who has become an enormously close friend of mine, a shaman in South Africa, a very famous man in South Africa called Credo Mutwa, he was decked literally from his neck to his feet in bright luminous turquoise. This is years later. The thing is, as science, the cutting edge of science is now beginning to understand, is that everything is a vibration, and we are affected by those vibrations. This is why people who live under power lines and other electromagnetic fields tend to get ill, and cancers, leukemias that are much rarer in the general population. It's because the electromagnetic field is destabilizing, imbalancing, causing dis-ease in the human energy field, and therefore it manifests as what we call illness. In the same way, we can interact or come into contact with harmonious energy fields, or energy fields that are harmonious to us, because we're all different, and therefore we can be attracted to them. And of course, everything is a vibration, and so is a color. And you know, when we say to people all the time, Adrian, don't we? We say, hey, you don't half look great in that colour. It makes you look so vibrant.
Yeah.
And then they'll put another colour on, and they say, hey, that's taken all the colour out your face. It's because they're different vibrational fields, this is why you get up in the morning, and if you're in a certain vibrational state, you can be attracted to a certain colour that day and a different colour another day. And I was just attracted to turquoise at that time, and then it changed and what have you. But in terms of what you said about the Earth, and what I would emphasize is in that period, like on the Wogan show and around that period, I was trying to articulate something that I didn't completely I understood it, but I couldn't articulate it as well as I could now, because I was in that state of turmoil, and also it was 16 years ago, and that's 16 years of accumulated knowledge I didn't have then. But what is fascinating is someone came to me the other day to do an interview with me for a DVD documentary, and we started chatting. He started asking me questions while we were in the office just messing around about almost exactly what you just asked me about the Earth and what have you. And I said, look at what I've just posted on my website literally that morning, and it was a report that scientists are now saying that the Earth communicates vibrationally, and we communicate vibrationally with the Earth. And therefore, there is communication going on between the two. And one of the things that was pouring into my mind at that time, which is why I said what I did on the Wogan show, was that the Earth is literally hurt. It has feelings. It has an emotional and mental level, because everything is consciousness. I mean, the cutting edge of science is now understanding this. Hallelujah, about time. And where everything is consciousness, and we perceive ourselves as individual, and that there is space between everything. In fact, everything is the same vibrating ocean of energy. And if you hold a droplet of water in your hand, it can appear to be individual. But when you drop the droplet into the ocean, where does the droplet stop and the ocean start? It doesn't. It's one energy field. And that's what we're dealing with infinite consciousness energy, which manifests itself in infinite different ways. And so as we have emotions and as we have the ability to think and feel, so does the earth.
You see, David, when you're talking, the metaphor, where does the droplet end and the ocean begin? Mm-hmm. Zen monks and Zen philosophy has been trying to get, or the Zen philosophy has been trying to get the Zen monks to think that way mm-hmm. for centuries. But when David Icke says it, mm-hmm. people think he's mad. Now, the reason why I brought you to that subject and the original Wogan interview is because today I was just kind of wandering around, as you do, and something struck me. It wasn't a car, it was a thought. And the thought is this. I'm talking to David Icke tonight on the show. And over the last 13 months, David, from the mists of my recollection, said that there would be natural disasters. The Earth's not very happy, there's going to be natural disasters. And I thought about natural disasters. And because I train in a martial art called ninjutsu,
right?
The ninja live by 5 elements of what they call the Godai, which is the universe. And it's earth, wind, earth, water, chi, fire, wind, and void. And I thought, hang on a second. A year ago, 13 months ago, we had the greatest water natural disaster the Earth's ever seen, this particular tsunami. We've subsequently had earthquakes or earthquake in Pakistan. That was a huge disaster. We had all the terrible winds on record in the Americas. And now we only have one element to go. And you said, or I'm absolutely positive, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said on the original Wogan interview that there would be volcanoes erupting.
Right. I'll tell you why. Because that was the stuff pouring into my mind. I'll tell you a funny thing, Adrian. One of the things that was pouring into my mind at that time, as we talked about earlier, that period of 3 months, was the word tsunami. Now, believe it or not, at that time in 1991, or 91 as it was, I'd never heard of the word tsunami. It was only then that I realized it meant tidal wave, and what the hell's a tsunami? And what was pouring into my mind at that time was this, which could be extremely relevant to what's going on now, was that there was a shift taking place in the Earth's field. And when the Earth's field shifted, vibrationally shifted, there was going to be obvious and extreme effects on weather patterns. Because you've only got to look at a thunderstorm and lightning to see the obvious, that weather is an expression of energy. And if the energy field of the Earth, which we're living in, changes its vibrational state, what was coming into my mind was that it was going to start to vibrate quicker. That there was going to be obvious and gathering weather changes resulting from that shift. And I think that we're seeing that now. My own feeling is, and I'm not saying pollution is a good thing. Am I saying that? No. But what I am saying is I think this whole thing about global warming is to an extent, perhaps a large extent, a diversion from the real cause of these changing weather patterns, which is vibrational change within the Earth's energy field. But the other thing that, because one of the things I've learned through this period, May, is there's not one reason for anything, and there's usually not one answer for anything either. And there's no doubt, in fact, that you can look for the patents if you want and see them, that the technology exists to create weather catastrophes.
No way.
Oh, yes. You see, it goes back to the simple things like what the native peoples used to do, the Native Americans with their rain dances and stuff like that. What were they doing? They were using noise, sound. What is sound? It's vibration. And they were using these rituals, sound rituals and other rituals, to try to change the energy field so it actually produced rain. Because the difference between a dry weather period and a wet weather period is just the vibrational difference between the two. I mean, you've only got, if you want to feel it, you go out on a sunny day with a bright, massive open sky, and then you go under a a sky of heavy, dark cloud at 2,000 feet. And people, what do people say, mate? They say, it feels so heavy, doesn't it? Yes. Why does it feel heavy? Because there's a very dense vibrational field and you're feeling it. And what they're doing with their technology is simply on a much more advanced and powerful level using technology to affect the weather. So there have been questions, even among some weather experts, about things like Katrina, where they don't seem to follow the pattern of a hurricane as you would expect. No. And if they've not got the ability to create the hurricane in the first place, and I would suggest they have, they certainly have the ability to really whip one up once it started, so it becomes much more powerful than it would normally be. So again, one of the things that is a really key thing, and if someone said, in your opinion, what's the biggest contribution you've made over the last 16 years, I would say this. It was coining the phrase and explaining the technique that I've called problem, reaction, solution. To understand this, in 2 minutes about so much that's happening in the world, including perhaps why weather extremes are being artificially created in some of these examples. Problem, reaction, solution works like this. You want to change society in a way that you know that if you announced what you wanted to do openly, you would get a massive adverse reaction to it. You want more and more surveillance, more and more control. You want to launch a war on terrorism. You want to change the face of a country through a war or whatever. You know that you get an adverse reaction, so you don't do it openly. You play problem, reaction, solution. Stage one, you covertly create a problem. It could be a terrorist attack. It could be a hurricane. It could be a government collapse. It could be a run on a currency, whatever. You then tell the public through an unquestioning, pathetic mainstream media globally the version of your engineered event that you want them to believe, i.e. 9/11, bin Laden did it from a cave in Afghanistan. Must have had a good cell phone. Or the London bombings were done by these 4 bombers, or Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy, even though he must have had a bullet that could do U-turns. What you want at stage 2, the reaction, is the public being outraged, being in terrific fear, and saying words to the effect of something must be done, this can't be go on, what are they going to do about it? At which point, those who covertly created the problem got the public reaction, do something, then openly offer the solutions to the problems they've created, which are changes in legislation which advance the agenda of the centralization of power, the further destruction of freedom, that pushes this agenda forward. And what I've just described in the last 2 minutes, Adrian, is 9/11. If you look, I mean, even people like Blair and Bush, they're saying the world has changed dramatically since 9/11. Yes, it has. So who's benefited from 9/11? The Muslim world? No. The people who died in that horrific attack? No. One group of people and one group of people only. Those who wanted to take away more basic freedoms, launch a war on terrorism, which is nothing more than a war of conquest, and advance this Orwellian agenda. And they're the people who benefited.
I have lots of questions because, well, I'll explain in a moment. It is Adrian Allen and David Icke on BBC Radio Cleveland, 01642 225511. 07786 200 995 on the text, and of course the email is still open, adrian.allen@bbc.co.uk. BBC Cleveland with David Icke. Now, David, I'm reading a book by Dan Brown called Angels and Demons. I'm not going to go anywhere near the Da Vinci Code. I'm just reading Angels and Demons. And it's about the Illuminati and the New World Order. Now, you just talked about 9/11, which I'll get to at some point in the future.
I do hope so.
In our interview. But you're the man that I heard this word Illuminati first from. Then I see it in Dan Brown's book. What on earth is the Illuminati?
It's a network of interbreeding families that go back to the ancient world. You can pick them up. It goes back further than this, Adrian, but you can pick them up very easily in Babylon. And where was Babylon? And Sumer as well, the civilization known as Sumer. And where was Sumer and Babylon? Iraq, the land that we now call Iraq. They relocated eventually to Rome, and it was when they were in Rome that we had the Roman Empire and the creation of the Roman Church, which is nothing more, and, you know, I can show this, this, and I do in my books in great detail, is nothing more than the Church of Babylon relocated. That's why the holy days of the Church of Rome are the same holy days as the Church of Babylon. These interbreeding family bloodlines then expanded. They still stayed in Rome, and they're still massively there, but they expanded out into Northern Europe, where they became the European aristocracy and royal families. And through the British Empire and other European empires, but particularly the British, they expanded and exported these bloodlines all over the world. And then what happened is we had this sleight of hand when it appeared that the European powers gave independence to their former colonies. What actually happened was they exchanged a form of dictatorship, overt dictatorship that you could see and has a finite life, because the people under that kind of dictatorship know they're in a dictatorship and they're not free. They replaced that with covert dictatorship, the hidden hand, the bars you can't see. And people don't rebel against not being free when they think they are, and so they sit in the cell thinking they're not in a cell. And the way they did this was, when on the surface they appeared to give freedom to the colonies, they left behind in those countries, including the United States, the bloodline and the secret society network through which they manipulate that bloodline into power. And they've gone on controlling those countries ever since. The reason, for instance, you couldn't get a cigarette paper between Tony Blair and the Democrat, apparently, Bill Clinton, and then a far-right Republican comes in, George Bush, and you can't get a cigarette paper between him and Tony Blair either, is because the same force is controlling both. I mean, does anyone really think that George Bush is controlling America? Well, no one with a brain cell on active duty does. But so what's the next question, Adrian? Okay, if he's not controlling it and calling the shots, who the heck is? And given that there's people we don't know, or we can name a number of them, for sure, I do in my books, but there is a force that much of it we can't see that's dictating to Bush. How come Blair you can't get a cigarette paper between him and Bush in terms of policy and view and action? Because the shadowy people controlling Bush are the same people controlling Blair, and vice versa. And you know, the world becomes a much more understandable place once you start to connect dots. Because when you know, in these children's magazines and stuff, you see all these dots. It's just a kind of, well, what is it? It's all the dots everywhere. You connect them in the right order, and a very obvious and clear picture appears. And that's what you can do when you research into the background.
So are you saying that these people that control Bush and Blair are the Illuminati?
Absolutely. Oh, yes. One of the great centers of the Illuminati on the planet is the City of London, the financial district, and the area that it fuses into, which is around the area known as Temple Bar, or the Temple. One of the secret societies that you'll see in these mentioned in these books, like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci Code, etc., are the Knights Templar. Now, the Knights Templar were formed before the time of the Crusades in the Holy Land. And they were about 9 people to start with. They then went to Jerusalem, parked themselves in Jerusalem for something like 9 years. And then suddenly, for mysterious reasons, as people perceive, a couple of them went back into France and started signing up the aristocratic families of Europe. They became fantastically wealthy. And the reason they call that area of London the Temple, etc., is because it was owned, and in truth still is controlled, by the Knights Templar. And there's an ancient Knights Templar temple right in the middle of that area where the top barristers of Britain are trained, including, sits back in amazement, Tony Blair, who was trained in that very place. So was his wife, Cherry Blair. And the Knights Templar are one of these key groups connected to the Roman Church and the Vatican still that orchestrate events behind the scenes, because the point is that if you can see the person, in other words, they have a title that appears to put them in a position of power like president or prime minister, you're still looking at gophers. you're still looking at puppets. They might be puppets in terms of Blair, in significant awareness of what they're doing and why, but they're still gophers, and they're there because the shadowy figures with the real power who are orchestrating this have allowed them to be there and allow them to continue to be there while they serve the agenda.
Well, forgive my naivety, David. The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the most powerful individual in the country, surely.
No, he's the most powerful one on public display. Let me explain to you how they manipulate the so-called two-party state. They do it in America as well. Right. What they do is when they want someone in power, they target the opposition. So the person they want is perceived, even though they're very unpopular, as the only one that is credible to become the leader. So, for instance, the Illuminati orchestrated, in the run-up to the 1979 election, as I show in my books, the so-called Winter of Discontent. They manipulated it so they created mayhem. A monkey with a blue rosette was going to get in 1979. Their chosen one was Margaret Thatcher, who supposed to be the Iron Lady. She was one of the most manipulated prime ministers in history. She was particularly manipulated by a man called Lord Carrington, who I talk about a lot in my earlier books. Because they wanted Margaret Thatcher in power through the 80s, because they wanted to transform this country and Europe economically, they made sure that there was no perceived alternative. And, again, what an amazing coincidence. In 1980, the Reagan-Bush administration came in America, in truth, the Bush-Reagan administration. And while this apparently unconnected election of Margaret Thatcher produced an economic theory system called Thatcherism, in came Reagan with exactly the mirror. Reaganomics. Reaganomics. Now, I love people, Adrian, talking about conspiracy theorists. I love the coincidence theorists. I think they're very, very entertaining. Anyway, during the 1980s, what happened? All hell broke loose in the Labour Party. They produced as an alternative to Thatcher, Michael Foot. Wasn't perceived as at all credible as a leader. Margaret Thatcher got in again, even though she was very unpopular. And then we had the windbag from Wales, who I've met a couple of times, and I wouldn't allow to tell me the time unless I checked it. Neil Kinnock, and he wasn't perceived as credible. He is now. He's in the Lords. And on it went. Now, when along came Tony Blair as the Illuminati chosen one, what happened? After he replaced John Smith, suddenly all hell broke loose where? In the Conservative Party. And what also happened, for the first time in history, Rupert Murdoch changed his allegiance of all his newspapers from the Conservative Party to Tony Blair. And Tony Blair, not least because of the way he unbelievably distorted the facts over the invasion of Iraq has now become painfully clear to anybody. It's very, very unpopular. But because the Conservative Party has been in turmoil, just like the Labour Party was during Thatcher, he was perceived as the only one who you could really have as a leader. And now we have a situation where it's becoming obvious that we live in a one-party state, in the fact that you could not put forward a credible case for there being any difference whatsoever between a Tony Blair government, a Cameron government, and a government of anyone who now is going to lead the Liberal Democrats.
But surely you are using the word obvious, David, and not that I have to tackle this, but all of this is already known. Why is it that you have to stand up and say, open your eyes, when what you've just described to me is the blatant obvious? Well,
what I've described about the years of Thatcher and the Labour Party and the years of Blair and the Conservative Party is not obvious to vast numbers of people, in fact, the vast majority of people. And what we have to be careful of is that those that do the research, I've spent 16 years full-time doing this, and I've been to more than 40 countries doing it, but because we gather this information together, that we don't think that that everyone sees it as obvious as we do, because the rest of the people haven't had access to this information. But it's not just that you're putting A to B to C and coming up with conclusions. This stuff's written down, Adrian. And I'll give you an example of what I mean in terms of written down. And people can go on the internet and see this if they want. During the 1990s in America, an organization was created called the Project for the New American Century. Yes. Now, this was created by the leading figures in the Bush administration since Bush came to power. We're talking Dick Cheney. We're talking Donald Rumsfeld, the defense secretary. We're talking Paul Wolfowitz, the deputy defense secretary and now head of the World Bank, a massively influential position. We're talking about John Bolton, who's now the United States ambassador to the United Nations, and he's going to start giving it big time over Iran and the Security Council in the days and weeks to come. We're talking Jeb Bush, the president's brother, and a stream of people who came to power in January 2001 with the Bush administration. Now, in September 2000, just before Bush scammed the election, and which again can be shown, the Project for the New American Century produced a report, a blueprint for what it wanted to do. And in that, it said they wanted to use the excuse of Saddam Hussein to go into Iraq, that they wanted to target Iran, Syria, North Korea, and wait for this, eventually bring about the democratization of China, and that this is what they
and this is all freely available.
This is available. Oh yes, it's detailed in my books. But if you go to my website, I'll tell you what I'll do. If people go to my website, davidicke.com, and go to the headlines page, I will post, after this interview, I will post the link that people can go to who are listening to this interview. And what happened was that this crowd that produced this report came to power with the Bush administration. And so they were going to target Iraq and invade Iraq for years and years and years, going right back into the 90s. As I said in my books, immediately after the invasion. And this is why leaked documents from the UK government, as has been revealed in the mainstream press, have shown that the decision was made to invade Iraq at least a year before they invaded, even though right up to the invasion, Bush and Blair were saying, oh, no, we're still trying to bring about a peaceful settlement. I mean, insult my intelligence. Now, in January 2002, President Bush came out with his State of the Union address, in which he used that now infamous phrase, the axis of evil.
Yes.
Now, what is the axis of evil? It is Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. These are names right straight from the pages of the Project for the New American Century. Who wrote that Bush speech? Because he never writes any for himself. A man called David Frum, who was a Bush speechwriter at the time and is absolutely fundamentally connected to the Project for the New American Century and the people that put that report together. Now, here's the vital thing to get over. In that report, Adrian, it says that this process of conquest, what it uses in its own language, this process of transformation, was going to be necessarily slow and laborious, quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. 1 year to the month after that report was published, 9 months after the people that wrote it came to power with Bush, we had what Bush called at the time our Pearl Harbor, 9/11. And as a result of that, and only as a result of that, what that report demanded to happen has been happening at a rate of knots. And now, of course, what we're seeing every day is the manipulation of opinion to target the next on the list, which is Iran. If people think that it is a coincidence that they say we need a catastrophic event to push this agenda forward. They get the catastrophic event, and when you do the research into their official story, as I have in a book called Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster, you find that not one strand of it fits with another. If they're coincidences, then, I'm the man from the flipping moon. The thing is that all that's followed 9/11 in terms of destruction of freedoms, the war on terrorism, the invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, has been justified by what has happened because of 9/11. And this is a funny thing. I was asked on a Los Angeles radio station about just a few days after 9/11 because they'd seen on the internet that
I'll tell you what, David, before you launch into 9/11, my guest for the moment, for this evening, is David Icke. Welcome to the Late Show phone-in on BBC Radio Cleveland, David.
Thanks, Adrian.
I've got many questions, but a fairly simple question that I think will deserve possibly a fairly simple answer. Is David Icke, this so-called guru by the media, only a guru because they can look back at what you've said with hindsight and find that there is an element or a grain of truth in what you've been saying for the last 16 years?
Well, actually, there's an enormous amount of truth, and it's not because I'm a prophet. It's because I've done basic research. Basically, what I've been is a journalist, Adrian, without an editor. I mean, you know all about that.
Yeah.
In your career, anyone in journalism and broadcasting does. There's someone that says, hey, you can't say that, you can't say that. You've got to clear that with the lawyers. And, of course, if the word no did not exist in the English language, then media lawyers would be permanently speechless because they cover their backsides all the time. What I am is a journalist without an editor, so I'm able to research things, come to conclusions, get the evidence, and then I know that it's going to go out there in my books without someone saying you can't say that. My reply is, watch me. And so that's what I am, and so there's an enormous amount of supportable truth in all this, and it's this that people find so compelling, that it's not just, this is my idea of what's going on. It's supported by the sources and a lot of extremely compelling evidence.
Pretty much what you're saying is in the public domain anyway.
Well, a lot of it is, enormous amounts of it are not. See, the thing is, if you can, these guys know that they can't put a finger in every hole in the dike. And they're not too troubled by what I'm talking about being on the periphery, where a few people compared with the global population get access to it. Their great nightmare, their worst nightmare, is this stuff getting into the mainstream.
Right.
And that's why I am working my backside off to become their worst nightmare by getting it into the mainstream. Because, when you look at, society in general, people get 99%, maybe in some cases, in a lot of cases more, from the mainstream media, from mainstream television, mainstream radio, mainstream newspapers. And if you can keep that information out of that arena, then you're gonna keep people in the dark anyway, even though the information exists. But what I am, more than anything, is a dot connector. And so you're quite right. A lot of this stuff is in the public domain, but it's not in the public domain connected to each other.
Right.
You look at fact A, and it might be insignificant in itself, as same with fact B or fact D or C, but you connect them together, A, B, C, D, and it's, whoa, is a profound understanding there, but only when they're connected.
Well, you mentioned 9/11 a little earlier, and I have to ask you the question and find out what your theory, if you wish, or how you connect the dots with that. But have you heard of a book called Storming Heaven?
No, I've not actually.
Right. The book was released mid-90s, I think. 95, maybe 96.
Right.
Freely available on Amazon, freely available in the public domain. Couple of quid, it's yours. The book, the premise of the book, is the story of how terrorists hijacked planes and used them as missiles to fly into places like the Pentagon and the World Trade Center.
Yeah, I didn't recall the name, but I am aware of the existence of that book, and now you've said what it says. Let me tell you something really fascinating, which funnily enough, I've not seen in the mainstream media. Did you know that on the morning of 9/11, of all mornings, the American Air Force military were running, quote, exercises responding to apparently fake terrorist attacks and hijackings, which included smashing planes into public buildings in Washington.
No way.
Yes. And who was orchestrating this? Dick Cheney.
No way.
Now, one of the things I highlight in my book, Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster, is the, on the face of it, inexplicable lack of reaction by the organization called NORAD,
yes,
which supposed to react immediately to hijackings and to planes in American airspace when they have lost connection between the pilot and the air traffic control, and or the transponders go off.
Yeah.
Well, when you do the research, you find that day after day, week after week, year after year, there is immediate response. On 9/11 of all days, there wasn't. And one of the reasons there wasn't, Adrian, is because the system was completely confused by, hey, is this real or is this part of the exercise? What's going? That's one of the reasons. Right. And I'll ask you another question.
Right.
We had a situation where the most defended country in the world, including the most, what must be one of the most defended buildings in the world, the Pentagon, was allowed to be attacked without any reaction and response from the American military or Air Force that made any difference. One of the things they did is when the Pentagon was hit, and there's massive questions, and quite right ones when you look at the evidence, whether it was even a plane. But the reason there was no response to meet a plane that, according to the official story, had turned around in the Midwest and headed back to the place it took off from. Now, that's brilliant planning by the terrorists, isn't it? Was because they had to launch response jets from the area of Langley, 130 miles away. The question's been asked by me in my books and by other people too. Excuse me, there's a no-fly zone over Washington. How can you have a no-fly zone over Washington and have it policed from 130 miles away? 10 miles down the road from the Pentagon is the Andrews Air Force Base, where they keep Air Force One. That's where they have the home of the Washington, D.C. Air National Guard, whose job it is to defend the airspace over Washington and to launch jets whenever there's a threat. The mainstream media even said that once the Pentagon was hit, jets were launched from the Andrews Air Force Base to patrol the airspace over Washington. Why weren't they launched to meet the threat to the Pentagon? Why was it 130 miles away, which means they never got there? Another question. Did you know, Adrian, that on Radio 5, BBC, on the morning of the London bombings, the head of a crisis management company was interviewed and said that that morning, he said, what an amazing coincidence. We were running a exercise on the same underground area, the same stations that the bombs actually went off in that morning. And this exercise was bombs going off at those locations.
And multiple targets, yes.
He said in that interview on the morning of the bombings, the only difference between our exercise that involved hundreds of people apparently and what actually happened was that our bombs in the exercise were to go off simultaneously, whereas the ones have actually gone off over a period of 50 minutes, which is what the police were saying at the time. A couple of days later or so, the police then say we've now established that the bombs went off simultaneously, which means that what actually happened was an exact mirror of the exercise that was going on. Another question, how come some people that were in those carriages, including a man quoted in the Cambridge Evening News about his experience, said that, first of all, he said, I was looking around the carriage just before the explosion happened. He said, I saw no one fitting the description of the bombers and no one with a bag. He said, when I looked at the hole in the carriage, the hole came out from the bottom, not out from the inside. I mean, where are the mainstream media? Where are people who laughingly put journalists on their tax return? Where are these people? When you do the research, doing real journalism, you find that we are being lied to on an unbelievable scale. And then the question is, why and to what end? The centralized Orwellian control of the planet, that's to what end?
But why don't... Okay, answer me this, David. You have all this information in your head. You've got all this information at your disposal.
Right.
Why aren't people going, hang on a second, enough is enough?
Well, people who read my books and look at the information compiled by people like me all over the world, because like I say, you're not talking to the only one. You're talking to one of enormous numbers and gathering numbers of people who are doing this research. Again, we're talking about what I mentioned earlier. You have to get it into the mainstream of knowledge, the mainstream media, before 99% of the population are actually going to know it exists. I tell you from experience, mate, when they do know it exists, that's exactly the response that they have. But we need a lot more people to come into this awareness so that we have a critical mass of people saying what you rightly say. Enough is enough. We're not having this anymore. Because frankly, mate, we're standing at a fork in the road. We go one way and wake up and take our eyes from the television screen and worrying who shot Phil Mitchell. We are going to take our freedoms back, and we're going to transform society from a prison to a paradise, because it's just a decision we have to make to do that. We keep going along the fork in the road that we're going now. We are going to live in a global fascist dictatorship within 10 years, and probably a lot less than that. That's the choice we have to make, and if we don't choose to challenge this and to say no more, then go and look our children in the eye. What were you doing, Daddy, when the world became a fascist state? I was watching EastEnders, honey. There was a good episode that night. I mean, please. We need to enter adulthood, and we need to look this tornado in the face, because it's coming anyway. And we can choose to take avoiding action by facing it, or we can get smacked up the bum with it while we're leaning over with our head in a bucket of sand. That's the choice we have to make, and we don't have forever to make it. In fact, we've got to make it now.
David, it's been a fascinating conversation this evening. Lots to talk about, and people pays the money and they takes their choice. They can read whatever books they want to read, watch whatever TV shows they want to watch, but ultimately they're going to be made responsible for their own individual actions.
Exactly, and I'm speaking at the Brixton Academy in London on May the 6th for 7 hours with breaks and hundreds of illustrations, and the dots will be put together then if people are really interested.
And if they want any more information about you yourself?
They go to davidicke.com, go to the headlines page, and the information about Brixton, and a daily appraisal of what's going on in the world as opposed to what the mainstream are telling us is going on, they'll find every day, completely free of charge.
Fantastic. David, thank you for your time, sir. I wish you well with future projects, and hopefully we can have you back on the show in the future.
Pleasure, Adrian. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. Talking with David Icke this evening.